Welcome, many, and everyone, to this session of the 7th edition of the Plural Positivity World Conference. This session is presented by Chudgar, covering important and sensitive topics including psychotherapy, IFS, integration. Please remember to prioritize your self-care during this session. You're encouraged to take breaks whenever needed and honor your collective emotional well-being. If you have questions for the presenter, please share them under the Questions tab so they can be addressed during the live Q&A. Afterward, we warmly invite you to visit this presenter's booth where you'll find helpful PDFs and additional free resources. Now, without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our wonderful presenter to you all. Here is Chudgar.
Hello, everybody. This session is called Beyond IFS, toward a model of inner work that works for plural systems. The internal family systems model of human ecology, called IFS for short, is quickly growing in popularity worldwide. IFS teaches that human psychology is naturally multiple and that healing happens when we know and love every part of who we are. It teaches a lot more than that. We'll get into that. But that's the gist. So there's a clear affinity between IFS and the experience of plural systems. Despite that, the model is still largely taught and practiced without considering the real diversity of plural experience and what systems need from day to day. So as a plural IFS practitioner, I want to change that for everybody's benefit. And it's my belief that a model of human multiplicity that works better for plural systems will serve singlets better too. So let me start by introducing my system. So my name is Chudgar. These days, I think of myself as a median system of 7 or so members, depending how you count. We are comfortable using he, him, or they, them singular pronouns for general purposes. But among fellow systems, as we are right now, we really like having the freedom to use we as well as I to refer to this whole ensemble. Every plural system is different, and the only one we really understand is our own. So we'll use our own system as an example sometimes in what follows. If you can't see me, I'm a light-skinned person with a bald head, 45 years old. I have a brown beard tied into 2 braids with these little yellow roses at the ends of them. I am wearing a green quilted coverall with a red lining and corduroy lapels because it's chilly here in Minneapolis. I am sitting in front of a bunch of bookcases here with books and plants on them. And that's me. So if your system likes to take notes, you are welcome to, but I will also provide the slides at the end if you want them. You should feel free to experience this session in whatever way works best for you, like by watching the video or pausing and going back, or by just reading the transcript. I won't mind, whatever works. And okay, to start, I want to thank some of the people and systems who have helped make this presentation possible. We were honestly really nervous submitting this session for the Plural Positivity World Conference because we know full well that IFS is very controversial in the plural community for really good reasons. To our delight and panic, the session did get approved, so we have been spending a lot of time learning from the IFS and plural communities to prepare. We want to offer our gratitude to a few folks in particular. First, our friend and colleague and IFS genius Forrest Merrill for their wisdom about plurality and dissociation. We want to thank the coaching clients who have trusted us to share their plural experience. The public scholarship of Jamie Marish's system. You may have encountered Jamie in previous plural positivity events. They are amazing. And most of all, we want to thank the Reddit community of our plurals, a community we just found a few days ago, which has been incredibly welcoming and helpful. And of course, thank you very much to the Stronghold system who convened us here today, and everymany in the Plural Association who has volunteered to make this conference possible. and to every member of every system who is here. Thank you. All right. So I want to tell you a little bit about this system because it's important. We came to understand our own plurality through internal family systems. And when we did, we were in adulthood, we had a job, we had a stable home and family life. Like we were in the best possible position to come to terms with our own plurality. And IFS is what enabled us to do that. So first, we read do-it-yourself IFS books. Then we worked with an incredibly skillful IFS practitioner. Then we had the astonishing good luck of being able to learn the model in the IFS Institute's Level 1 training. Then we started working one-on-one with clients, including some plural systems, DID, diagnosed, and otherwise. We also then read up on plurality, started learning about what other plural systems are like, and attending events like this one. And then finally, by coming to realize that, yep, it works best if we conceptualize ourselves as plural. So as a system, we have experienced IFS as profoundly healing and liberating, but our experience is not the norm. So from what we've learned so far, most plural systems encounter IFS as a therapeutic method in order to make sense of their system when it's not working well. And too often, the IFS they encounter through therapists or practitioners or independent reading or social media is unhelpful at best and traumatizing at worst. So that means for many systems, and maybe yours, the most important concepts in IFS can be triggering all by themselves. And so with that, we want to offer this content advisory that also doubles as the conceptual structure of this presentation overall. All right? Here's the content advisory. We are going to discuss the IFS term for members of plural systems, which is parts. That may really rub the members of your system the wrong way. That's okay. We're going to talk about it though. Next, we're going to talk about the specific roles that IFS describes for three very different kinds of parts. Those roles may really not fit for you. They don't fit for us either. We're going to talk about them. And finally, most distressingly of all, we're going to talk about the IFS idea of the self. That is the IFS concept for what is the seat of consciousness and the agent of healing inside everyone. Okay, these are the central concepts of IFS. I'm going to define them later on. But if your system has had bad experiences with these ideas in the past, I want you to know we are truly sorry. I want to apologize to your system on the behalf of the IFS community. You deserve professional helpers and theoretical models that truly serve your system as it actually is. I'm hoping we can help evolve IFS into a theoretical model that actually works for plural systems like yours and mine. So here's how. First, we'll do a quick overview of IFS by the book. So in this case, the current textbook that IFS practitioners are supposed to read to learn the model. And the idea here is to establish what official IFS actually says and correct some really important misconceptions that are very common. Next, we're going to look at how plural systems actually experience IFS in real life, which is often really different from by the book IFS and works really badly for systems. After that, we're going to offer a few very specific suggestions for adapting the by the book IFS model to make it more helpful and more therapeutic for plural systems of all kinds, maybe yours. And finally, we're going to offer you some practical invitations to make IFS work better for your system, if and only if you want it to. Okay? So first, let's talk about IFS by the book. We're going to be using this book. It is called Internal Family Systems Therapy, 2nd edition, by Richard Schwartz and Martha Sweezy. This is the textbook IFS practitioners are supposed to learn the model from. And then we're also going to refer to this very interesting book that the founder of IFS co-wrote with Robert Falconer, and it's called Many Minds, One Self, Evidence for a Radical Shift in Paradigm. These are books co-written by the founder of IFS, Richard Schwartz, and so they are as close as you can get to, like, from the horse's mouth, what IFS officially is. All right. So back to those triggering central IFS concepts, right? First, parts. Parts, according to IFS by the book, are discrete autonomous mental systems, each with their own abilities, desires, and views of the world. Every one of us contains an inner tribe of people. So IFS teaches that psychic multiplicity is normal and, in fact, universal. IFS stipulates that everyone is plural. IFS is sometimes characterized as opting into DID, which is not really right in a lot of ways, but in some. So that's the IFS concept of parts. So, roles. In response to danger, the textbook says, the individuals in human systems, and by individuals, they mean parts too, individuals take on roles that can be categorized by three groups: managers, exiles, and firefighters. You may have heard these terms yourself. So IFS says that the parts of people tend to respond to trauma in three predictable ways. Some parts manage day-to-day life in order to keep overwhelming feelings at bay. Other parts of people are exiled. That is to say, they're kept out of awareness, along with the overwhelming feelings that they hold, like shame or terror or rage or overwhelming feelings like that. So exiles are another kind of part. And then third, IFS says that firefighter type parts respond quickly when exiled parts emerge into awareness by using strategies that reduce their overwhelm and push them back out of consciousness. So classical firefighter behaviors are like numbing substances like alcohol or other drugs, or behaviors that like get you out of the overwhelm. So IFS teaches that all systems have parts that play these roles if they've been traumatized. So finally, IFS by the book teaches that everyone can access the active, compassionate leader we call the self, which is characterized by clarity, perspective, compassion, effective leadership. IFS says that everyone has this self in them. This is the proper inhabitant of the seat of consciousness. It's always calm, compassionate, courageous, connected. There are a bunch of other words that start with C. IFS teaches that self cannot be harmed or killed. It doesn't need to develop. It's just there in everybody, constantly available. But IFS also teaches that parts who play those three roles we talked about get in the way of self's leadership by occupying the seat of consciousness instead. So sometimes the idea that IFS practitioners use is that self is like the sun, and that parts are like clouds that get in the way of the sun, and that what IFS therapy should do is help the parts clear away so that the clear light of the solar self can shine onto everything. Okay, so by the book, IFS is really clear about all three of these concepts: parts, the roles of parts, and the self. We're not endorsing these concepts. In fact, the second half of this presentation is going to modify them considerably, but this is what IFS teaches by the book. So as people practice the model and talk about it on social media, these very clear by the book IFS concepts get distorted in a few really important and harmful ways. So here are some common IFS misconceptions. You'll see these misconceptions everywhere, not just on Reddit or Facebook or wherever you get your social media parts knowledge from, but also among trained IFS practitioners who really ought to know better. So I'm scribbling through the misconceptions to show just how mistaken they are, okay? One misconception about parts is that they are just metaphors for feelings or mental states or sub processes or something like that. This is not true, but you hear it everywhere. And even some IFS practitioners who say that parts are not just metaphors actually act as though they are. Okay. There are two common misconceptions about those three roles that IFS says parts can play. First, it's sometimes said that once they abandon their roles, parts should be integrated into self. This is not true. IFS does not teach this, but you hear it everywhere. And even some IFS practitioners who should know better, they will say that integration into self isn't the goal, but in practice, they act as though it is. Okay. Another important misconception about the roles of parts is that parts are just the roles they play. Again, absolutely not what IFS teaches, but you hear this all the time. And sometimes people reduce parts to specific feelings, like in the Inside Out movies. Oh, this part is my anger part, or this part is my shaming part. That's really not helpful at all, and also really disrespectful. Okay, finally, a misconception about self, that self is just the part who is or should be in charge. Again, that is not IFS teaching at all, but it's a common idea. And so the way self often comes up in IFS spaces is as the part who's the most grown up, who's the most wise, who's like the most with it. And that part ought to be in charge of everybody else. Not IFS teaching, but often what you'll hear. At this point, I want to correct the record about what by the book IFS says about these misconceptions. So, corrections. First, parts populate our inner world. They are not metaphors. Rather, they are inner beings with full personalities. Richard Schwartz and Bob Falconer say this verbatim. IFS does not believe that parts are metaphors. IFS believes they are real. Okay. Second misconception that I want to correct, parts do not disappear under self-leadership, but their extreme roles do, as does the rigid three-group arrangement of managers, firefighters, and exiles. So in By the Book IFS, the integration of parts into the self is not, absolutely not, the goal. I cannot emphasize that enough. IFS teaching is also clear that parts are not just the roles they play. In fact, IFS says clearly that parts get to decide what role they want to play in the system, and they can and do change over time. Okay. Finally, another important correction from By the Book IFS. The self is either an active inner leader or an expansive, boundaryless state of mind, an I, or an expansive sense of space and energy. So in IFS, by the book, the self is not just some like special boss part who is in charge. It's more like what you would call Buddha nature or your inner light or compassionate awareness. For by the book IFS, self is fundamentally different in kind from parts. You can think of parts as like inner individuals and self as like a field of compassionate awareness that unites them all, that they all have access to. So that is what IFS teaches by chapter and verse. But those common misconceptions about IFS that I just debunked are everywhere, not only on social media or YouTube or whatever, but also among IFS practitioners who should know better. And even strictly by the book IFS, which is what I've presented so far, often doesn't work for plural systems. Okay. So for the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to stop talking about IFS as it is presented in books And I'm going to move into the realm of the experience of plural systems like yours and mine. So, my system, as I have said, knows how IFS doesn't work for us. We also understand how IFS doesn't work for our clients who are plural systems who needed adaptations of the model too. But we also wanted to understand how IFS doesn't work for other systems. And so to find out, we asked the IFS and plural communities on Reddit that exact question. The way we phrased it is, what do you wish IFS knew about plural systems? And the conversations that ensued, particularly on the plurals subreddit, were just massively mind-blowingly interesting. And I'm really looking forward to sharing this presentation with them. So here are some highlights. How do plural systems experience the idea of parts? So I'm quoting directly from Reddit folks here. Not everyone is plural. IFS says everybody is plural, that multiplicity is normal and natural and universal. Plural systems know better. That's just not the case. Some people are actually just straight up singlets. We're not metaphorical. Members of plural systems rightly resent being told that their headmates are just metaphors for something else. In fact, some IFS practitioners struggle to grasp that some of us actually do experience ourselves as internally multiple rather than being multiple as a sort of like therapeutic fiction that we adopt because it's helpful. One person said, IFS therapists I've worked with have been dismissive about us being a system. We heard that a lot. Okay. The idea of roles rubs plural systems the wrong way, too. Redditors told me, we are not just roles, we are people. By the book IFS agrees, parts are not just the roles they play, but in real world practice, often IFS treats parts as nothing more than like functional units who do a specific job in a rigid way. Another person said, we also particularly dislike thinking of ourselves as family. That's fair, right? For lots of plural folks, me included, family has never been a particularly safe or a desirable kind of environment to exist in the outer world, much less inside. Another system said, not every system is an internal family system. So we take this to mean that not every system is what IFS says it should be. And IFS can do a lot of harm to plural systems by insisting otherwise. So finally, the concept of self is really troublesome for many plural systems. One system says, no one in here is in charge and no one should be. That's true in my system as well. Systems don't need to be or have hierarchies. In fact, many plural systems, including this one, are deliberately anti-hierarchical. In fact, healing for us has meant getting out of rigid hierarchical structures in which some parts are in charge and others are expected to obey. And finally, you need to be both in self and in parts, depending on the context. And this is what IFS pathologizes. So there is a really pernicious notion in the IFS world that you're either in a part, which is bad, or you're in self, which is good. Now, that is not by the book IFS teaching. It really isn't. Nevertheless, in practice, it's totally how people behave. So you will see a lot of IFS practitioners and influencers doing a really elaborate job of performing being in self. Like they speak really slowly and quietly. They perform calmness, right? That's really not what we're after. But in practice, IFS teaches that only self ought to have agency in the world and that parts-led actions or behaviors are somehow fundamentally pathological. In the words of our fellow systems, the core concepts of IFS, parts, roles, and self, often just don't work. They're not helpful, they're not therapeutic, and they can be really harmful. But this system believes we can make them work better. Those huge problems with IFS are real, but it's also true that IFS is far and away the most plural-friendly psychotherapeutic model available in the world today. If there's a better one, please tell me. But from what I can tell, IFS offers an astonishing openness to plural experience that just exceeds whatever else is on offer. So, we want to offer some suggestions for moving beyond the by the book IFS model to make it more helpful to plural systems of every kind. We want to make IFS work better for plural systems like us and maybe like you. So, first, the core concepts, parts, roles, and self. We think that IFS can evolve beyond these core concepts that often don't work to represent plural experience in a much more accurate and respectful way. We think that IFS can evolve to conceptualize parts as the members of plural systems. It's not okay, we think, to call every member of every plural system a part. So we want to be a lot more agnostic in how we refer to the inhabitants of anybody's system. Then, rather than imposing a three-role taxonomy, IFS can evolve to encounter the structure of each plural system as it actually is. So rather than looking for roles and trying to pigeonhole people's system members into them, IFS can work better by just accepting a system as it is and trying to learn how it works on its own terms. And finally, rather than insisting on self-leadership as IFS by the book does, we believe IFS can adopt a more flexible understanding of how agency is distributed among the members of each individual system. Okay, so for what it's worth, here are our suggestions for adapting IFS to serve plural systems better. Number one, not everyone is plural. This is important. This idea keeps us from thinking that IFS ought to apply to everybody, which just doesn't seem right. And it also honors the uniqueness of plural experience. Some of us just do experience ourselves as a gang or a group or a team or something like that, and not everybody does. That seems like a fact about the world that we should acknowledge. System members are often not accurately described as parts. Some people talk about headmates, some people talk about alters, some people talk about introjects and fictives and a million kinds of different beings that we can have within us. There are many kinds of beings in each system, so don't call them parts unless they want to be called parts. Okay, 3. Each system is unique. Each system member is unique. So this suggestion comes naturally to skilled IFS practitioners, but we want to stress this. Every member of every system is unique. There is no universal template that fits every system or every member of it. When it comes to systems as they are structured, externally imposed taxonomies are usually inaccurate. So let me be clear. The categories of exile and manager and firefighter can be useful as a sort of heuristic or field guide for IFS practitioners to have in mind. They can be even helpful to folks who are just learning IFS as a way to understand their own system. But the idea that every member of every system has to fall into one of these categories is just wrong. 5, there is no right way to be a system. So IFS often gives people the impression that the only healthy kind of system is a nuclear family with a loving parent who's in charge, or a well-run company with a benevolent CEO who's in charge, or a presidential democracy with an awesome president in charge. Those are hegemonic forms of social structure in America right now, but there are many other ways to describe well-functioning systems, and those particular forms of system that IFS tends to default to are not obviously great. Okay. 6, each system has the right to determine its ideal structure. So the idea here is that the ideal organization of any plural system will arise from within rather than being imposed from without. And what that might mean is your system might want to organize itself in a way that is quite different from the IFS standard way of understanding things, and that's all right. Next idea. Self-leadership is not self-evidently ideal or desirable. So, to be clear, your system might in fact work best when self is a loving parent or a good CEO in charge of workers or a benevolent leader of a democracy. Maybe that does work for you, and that's okay. But self leadership as a concept, which is so central to IFS as a model, is hardly obvious or self evident, right? IFS thinks it is, but it isn't. And a lot of harm can happen when self leadership is foisted on systems who just don't resonate with that style of agency. Next, many systems flourish without hierarchy. So, in fact, lots of systems choose a model for system responsibility that is radically democratic or even straight up anarchist. My system, for example, uses a principle of what we call substantial unanimity in decision making. You get to decide what works for you, and maybe hierarchy does, and maybe it doesn't. And finally, independent action by system members is often beneficial. Right this second, for example, a member of my system called the professor is giving this talk. We used to be a real life English professor in the real world, so he's got a lot of practice. In IFS terms, we are in self to the extent that the professor is a sort of conduit for what we think of as the light inside us. And we're in self to the extent that all of the other members of our system are like fully on board with this enterprise. So you might call that being in self, but I call that my professor doing an amazing job. Spreading agency around in different ways is a really important way to evolve the IFS model. So we are incredibly eager to hear what you think of these suggestions in the Q&A. And for now, we want to conclude with a few offerings from our system to yours. Lots of plural systems with or without DID or OSDD diagnoses end up considering working with an IFS therapist or other IFS practitioner. And so we want to offer you some questions you might want to ask IFS practitioners to figure out if they will be a good fit for you. And finally, we'll offer you a couple resources that might be handy for further inquiry, IFS-wise and plurality-wise, okay? So first, questions to ask IFS practitioners. Now, you might or might not have access to an IFS professional at all. There aren't a lot of us, and we're very expensive for a lot of people. And even if you have the money to hire someone like me, or if you have insurance that enables you to see an IFS trained clinician, you might not have a lot of choice. You might have to just take whoever you can get and hope for the best. Those are real things. And I hope that the modifications to IFS we just suggested will help you take an unskillful IFS practitioner's advice and adapt it for you in a way that works. But if your system does have the freedom to be selective about IFS practitioners, here are some questions you might want to ask. How did you learn IFS? So here, you're looking for an answer that includes some kind of live, supervised, intensive training, one that includes both theoretical learning and opportunities to practice. The IFS Level 1 training is an example of this. So is Stepping Stones from IFS Canada, and there are a bunch of others. Now, if the practitioner you're talking to answers this question by saying, oh, I just read about it, or I learned about it on social media, or I watched some YouTube videos, those are red flags. Evasiveness of any kind here is a get up and go deal breaker. IFS is not hard to learn, but it does take a lot of in-person practice and nuanced theoretical understanding and supervision. Here's another question to ask. For you, what is a healthy system like? So here you're asking if this professional has a rigid idea of what healthy means. So if they talk about something like integrating parts into self, that is a giant red flag. IFS does not ever suggest that you need to dissolve your internal complexity or banish any member of your internal system or reduce the reality of your system to just one personality. Next, would you be open to finding alternatives to the concepts of parts or self? You may or may not want to ask this question, depending on if those concepts work or don't work for your system as you understand them. But if you dislike either of those concepts, you can ask this question to look for enthusiasm or at least curiosity. An IFS practitioner who will do a good job working with the plural system is going to be incredibly interested in what you mean when you say alternatives to the concepts of parts or self. And that might start a really good conversation. But if the practitioner has an answer here that's any flavor of no, that's probably a deal breaker. If they're not curious about how your system is different from the model they learned up front, they're probably not going to honor your system's experience when they work with you. Okay, here's another question. Do you benefit from using IFS in your own life? A great answer to this question is, oh my gosh, yes, here's how. Another acceptable answer would be, I don't make time for my parts as often as I should. That's not ideal, but it's okay because it gives you the sense that they are aware of their own multiplicity in one way or another. No, I do not benefit from using IFS in my own life, or any kind of evasiveness is really a red flag. An IFS professional who doesn't use the model in their own life is not likely to use the model skillfully when they're trying to help you, and they might very well do unintentional harm just because they don't understand what it's like from the inside out. And a final question, would you feel comfortable telling us or me a little bit about your system? This is only fair. If you do IFS therapy or you work with an IFS practitioner outside of the clinical setting, you're going to be sharing a lot about how your system operates. It is only fair for you to ask, how does your system work? So if the professional that you're considering working with is flummoxed by this question, or if they're evasive, or if they just say no, that's a red flag. Skilled IFS practitioners expect to be asked about their parts, and they should be fluent in talking about them. Now, it's also totally okay for a professional to be like, whoa, parts of me are really surprised that you asked that. Or they could express like surprise or concern in some way. That's actually a good sign. But any answer that leads you to believe that there is no system there in the practitioner, that's a red flag. So if your system does use these questions with a potential IFS practitioner, we will be very curious how they respond. So let us know. So finally, here are some resources that our system has to offer that might be helpful to yours. If your system is interested in exploring IFS, here are 3 great resources to start with. So first, the Textbook of IFS by Richard Schwartz, the founder of the model, and Martha Sweezy, who is better at explaining it. It's called Internal Family Systems Therapy, 2nd edition. Next, another book that I quoted from earlier. It's a book by Robert Falconer, co-authored with Schwartz. It's called Many Minds, One Self. It offers a much richer and more varied account of plurality. In fact, it's my hunch that Falconer wrote the book and Schwartz didn't have a lot to do with it. That's just my hunch. But it's a really good book. And then finally, a person called Levi, whom we know from the Partswork conference, has this amazing resource. It's free, it's online. It's a guide to IFS and more called The Integral Guide to Wellbeing. Plural systems really find it helpful. You can find that at integralguide.com. Two plural resources I have found especially helpful in my system. Jamie Marish's brilliant first-person guide to plurality called Dissociation Made Simple, highly recommended. And then the welcoming plural community on Reddit, which you can find at reddit.com/r/plural. Those are the folks who provided the plural experience we've talked about in this session. Oh, so that's all for now. I can't wait for the Q&A everymany. So finally, if your system has a use for these slides in our notes, you can find them at chud.gr/ppwc25 for Plural Positivity World Conference 2025. You can learn more about us, and you're very welcome to, by visiting our home on the internet at chudgar.com. And you can email anytime. Email is the form of communication our system likes best, ash@chudgar.com. So from our system to yours, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your curiosity and interest. And we can't wait to get to know you better in the Q&A. All right. Bye for now.